This story is, unfortunately, true. I grew up in the Sierra Nevadas. I wasn't big on camping, but spent a good chunk of my childhood weekends hiking with family and friends. The summer that I was 16, about 10 years ago now, my cousin C had come back from her first year of college, and her boyfriend Jay was visiting. Jay wanted to go on a hike with lake views, and C and I knew just the one. It was one of our favorites. The three of us set off on this hike. The trail isn't the easiest to find, but it's really popular with locals because of the view and general lack of tourists. We saw a couple of other hikers, some with dogs. It is an in-and-out trail that takes about 2 to 3 hours to the top, 2 to 3 hours back down. There are some smaller trails that branch off. We make it to the top in good time and enjoy our lunches overlooking the lake. After about an hour, we hear a scream in the distance, specifically a mountain lion scream. If you've never heard a mountain lion scream, it's really unnerving. It sounds a bit like a very loud, terrified woman screaming. This is not good, because when a mountain lion screams, it's part of a mating ritual. That means there are multiple mountain lions, and close. The bears in the Sierras are softies, but the mountain lions will attack you. They'll attack your pets. They've even been known to attack bikers. Jay was really freaked out. C and I were wary, but it was the first time that we'd heard mountain lions, and we had both seen them before. There was also an incident where, as kids, we laid out some expensive steak in my backyard in the hopes of luring a mountain lion to take pictures of it. It did not work, and my mother was unhappy about the steaks. C and I tell Jay that we need to pack it up and get back down the mountain. About 40 minutes into the hike back, Jay realizes that he forgot his phone in the lookout in his rush to leave. Of course. We decided that C and Jay would hike back up to retrieve his phone, and I would stay there on the trail to warn any other potential hikers that there are lions in the area. This is obviously not ideal for any of us, but seemed like the best choice at the time. I found a nice rock to sit on by the trail and was going through pictures we took. C and Jay had been gone for around 50 minutes when I heard the scream again, and it's hard to tell, but I think it's closer than before. I start to freak out because being alone is not good if a lion is nearby. About 20 minutes after that, I hear the scream again, and there is now zero doubt that it is closer. Logically, I know that lions don't scream when hunting. They are quiet. If a lion was hunting me, I wouldn't know it. That knowledge did not make me less scared. A couple minutes after that, I hear it again, extremely close by. I'm looking around and trying to find the best place for me to stand, back covered, in case of the worst. Suddenly, I see something out of the corner of my eye, standing still, 20 feet down the trail. A couple of feet off of it is a man. He's completely naked. He's filthy. He's skinny. And he's just standing there, looking at me. If you don't know where you're going, it's easy to get lost in the woods around there. And it doesn't take long, being alone, lacking food and water in the wilderness, to make people a little disorientated, a little crazy. My immediate response is that this man is probably a lost hiker, and judging by how dirty he was, he had been lost a long time. He needs help. I started walking towards him, asking if he's okay. I suddenly get this feeling of wrongness. I don't know how else to describe it, but the hair stood up on my neck. I stopped in my tracks, maybe 15 feet away now, and had the overwhelming urge to run. It seemed wrong. He looked wrong in a way I can't quite articulate. Instead of wanting to help, I'm now scared. I ask again if he's okay. He looks at me, then opens his mouth wide and screams. Not a normal scream. He screamed so loudly. Worse, it sounded just like the mountain lion. It occurred to me that we were probably hearing him the whole time. It was the single most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. I started screaming too. Why was he just standing there screaming? Do I run? Do I get out the bear mace? Suddenly, he closed his mouth, turned around, and ran into the woods very quickly. He disappeared into the trees, but the feeling of wrongness was still with me. I considered bolting down the trail, but decided to wait for C&J, who luckily arrived within 10 or 15 minutes. I told them what happened, and we decided to call into the rangers when we got service. I've always been left with the unsettling question, did I see a mentally ill, lost hiker who really needed my help, or did I see something else, something not human, mimicking the call of a mountain lion and stalking us down the mountain? Just a quick backstory. I grew up in Providence, RI, and everyone who's lived there knows that it's very busy and noisy all day. Buses, traffic, businesses everywhere. But at night, it gets very quiet and very eerie sometimes. This story is about an incident that happened to me when I was 15, and I got my first job at McDonald's. This gives me chills every time I think about it. I was 15, and I just got hired at McDonald's down the street from where I live. It was perfect because I could go to and from work without worrying about a ride from my parents. While working there, I met some kids my age that I became close with. Unfortunately, they weren't the greatest of kids. They were very rebellious. They would clown around at work, act disrespectful to customers, typical 90s punks. I slowly started to become like them. I began disrespecting my parents, which was totally not like me. But I was always the nerd that didn't have many friends, so I wanted to fit in. Side note, I was very sheltered growing up, and I didn't really get around much because my parents were very protective over me. One night, around 10 p.m., I finished watching Monday Night Raw and went downstairs to grab something to eat. I opened the fridge and heard my dad's footsteps. He wore those slippers that tap loudly on tile floor.
Chris, I've asked you all day to take out the trash. They come tomorrow, so do it now.
Now, normally, I would have taken it out the first time he asked me, but now that I was getting older and becoming a smartass, I didn't think it should be my responsibility anymore. I work now and go to school. You take it out, I replied. My dad's eyes got wide, as I'd never spoke to him that way before. He leaned in and said softly,
As long as you live here, you will help out. Now take out the trash or leave.
I called his bluff, and rather than just simply taking the trash out, I rebelled like the dumb teen I was. Fine, I'll leave. If you're gonna kick me out for that, don't bother looking for me. I'm done living in this stupid house, I said as I opened the door and slammed it. I walked towards McDonald's to see if any of my friends were there, and they weren't, just the maintenance guy finishing up the cleaning. Of course, of all nights, it was raining, so I had to find somewhere to go to stay dry. There was a bridge with an overpass a little ways down the street, so I started walking towards it. The whole time, I'm regretting what I did, and I wish I just took out the damn trash. I finally get to the bridge, and I climbed up the hill to the little section on the corner to stay out of view. I remember in school learning to go here in case of a tornado, so I knew I was safe. I patiently and stubbornly waited, assuming that my parents would call the cops, which in my mind would show me that they cared. An hour goes by. Nothing. No sirens. No cars were even on the road. It was getting pretty cold, but I promised myself I wouldn't give in. I crossed my arms over my legs and fell asleep. I woke up violently from a semi wailing on his horn over the overpass. I looked all around, confused. How long was I out for? I looked towards McDonald's, and I saw an old man in a gray suit sitting at the bus stop. It was weird. He was sitting, still facing forward. I assumed it must be like 5 a.m. since he was waiting for the bus. I stood up, very upset that my parents never tried to find me, and began walking to the bus stop. Now, I'm a very outgoing person, and I trust my gut. As I walked closer to the old guy, I didn't get any negative vibe as I approached him. He slowly turned his head and looked at me and smiled. Not a creepy or uncomfortable smile, a genuine peaceful smile. I smiled back and decided instead of going home, maybe I can vent to this guy and get some advice. I asked if he minded if I sat down. He smiled again and gestured towards the seat.
Is everything okay?
He said with concern. Yeah, I just ran away from home. My parents don't respect me anymore and how much I do all day, I said. I began telling him the story, and I noticed as time went by, he was becoming more and more anxious, and his smile began to turn into a frown. He began to start breathing loud, and he cut me off, dead sentence, and said,
You need to go home now,
with a stern voice. I was confused. I figured maybe his bus was coming soon, and he wanted to say that before he left. I looked down in frustration, because that's not what I wanted to hear. Suddenly, I felt a strong grasp on my arm. He grabbed me and looked me dead in my eyes. His eyes were terrifying at this point, bloodshot and wide, and I was shaking in fear, totally thrown off guard by his complete switch in his persona. He was literally shaking like he was afraid of something. He kept looking down the street and then back into my eyes.
You need to go home now,
he screamed at me. At this point, this guy was starting to scare me, so I stood up and nodded, and he let go of my arm. Nervously, I started walking back to my house. I figured my mom was already back making coffee, so my plan of sneaking back into the house and hiding in the basement was not going to happen. Just to see if she'd be up, I looked at my watch. It was 1:30 a.m. My heart stopped and my throat became dry. Why was that man at the bus stop at 1:30 a.m. when the buses aren't running? I turned back towards him to look at him. He was gone. I'm scared, confused. I needed to get home. I used my spare key to get into the house. I opened the door quietly, and everyone was asleep. I slowly opened the basement door and made my way downstairs to the storage area in the back. I buried myself under bags of clothes so that they wouldn't find me. I figured I could get some sleep. The image of the guy kept popping in my head, and I was so freaked out, it just made no sense. Just then, I heard loud sirens passing by, and not just one, multiple bursts of sirens coming every 10 seconds or so. I smiled, thinking, I've won. My parents called the police to look for me. My plan worked, and now I'll make them worry until morning and regret kicking me out. I made myself a little bed and covered myself up to stay hidden and fell asleep. I woke up to hearing my mother sobbing upstairs. I looked outside the little basement window and saw daylight, so I'd figure I'd go upstairs and get my apology. I opened the basement door and walked into the kitchen. My mother was sitting at the dining room table with her head in her arms. She immediately looked up at me and gasped. She stood up and ran over to me and hugged me so tight. I thought you were dead, she muffled into my jacket. I slowly pulled away and looked at her confused. Why would you think that? I asked. What she said next sent chills throughout my entire body. She said that last night, around 1:40 a.m., a drunk driver crashed into the bus stop in front of the McDonald's. It was completely destroyed. I started breathing heavy and realized that the man saved my life. If he didn't tell me to leave when he did, I would have been sitting there and would have been killed. So many emotions were running through me. I didn't know how to handle it, so I just hugged my mother and immediately began to cry. I apologized, and I realized that I missed the old me. I almost got myself killed for my own stubborn stupidity. I dropped those friends, and I got into a new crowd at school, and from that point on, anytime the trash was full, I just took it out. I don't know who or what was at that bus stop, but thank you for saving my life. Whether it was just a lucky coincidence or right place, right time kind of thing. But no matter what, all I know is if it wasn't for him telling me to go home, I would have been sitting on that bench for the rest of the night. This story was told to me by my uncle and swears it really happened. He was the only one in the family this happened to, so no one else could back his story. I don't know if I believe this myself. In 1979, there was a 12-year-long civil war in El Salvador. My uncle was in the military. He was sent to the woods, jungle, with like 6 other guys to look for militia groups that were supposedly camping out there. After walking in the woods, jungle, for hours, they suddenly felt the ground shake as if something big was coming towards them. He described it like Jurassic Park, when a T-Rex was coming towards them and the water rippled. He said they thought it was the enemy doing something, so they hid. He said that he was shocked when he saw a giant. He said it was walking in the distance. I asked him if it was just maybe a really, really big person, like Bigfoot, and he said no. It was more of a Jack and the Beanstalk kind of giant. He said there were trees blocking the view somewhat, but he could make out that it was like a really big human. He said it was as tall as the tallest tree there. He said he tried to get a good look at it, but he was terrified and didn't want to get out of his hiding when he realized what it was. He said the giant basically just walked past them. He said they were all terrified and that they waited for a while as they were scared to bump into another one. He said 2 of the guys suggested trying to kill it to get rich, but the guy in charge told them to stand down. My uncle said everyone thought they were idiots for suggesting such a thing. He said they walked back to base as quickly and quietly as possible. They told everyone when they got back. No one believed them. They were friends with the pilots, and the pilots called bullshit on their story because they fly over the jungle all the time and would have seen such a creature, especially if it was as tall as the trees, as they claimed. He said all of the guys described what they saw. One guy claimed that it appeared bald. Another guy thinks that it had some sort of loincloth, like Tarzan. My uncle emphasized that he didn't get a good look, and that all he knows is that the ground was shaking, as if some really big creature was coming towards them. He saw what appeared as a giant human walking in the distance. He got down and hid and waited until it was gone. I began to ask him things, like if it was real. Don't you think that they would have found a body or some bones of something that big? Especially since El Salvador was so tiny in relation to other parts of the world. He responded along the lines of, I don't know about none of that stuff. I just know what I saw that day. I don't know how I feel about this one personally. This one seems a little out there. My mom said it was maybe some sort of spirit that just made itself appear as a giant to scare them. During the Civil War times, my mom claims there was a lot more paranormal things going on because of all of the deaths that were happening. A lot of innocent people were being killed. My grandma would say if you looked out the window of the house, you would see dead bodies on the street. That wouldn't explain the ground shaking, though. Has anyone ever encountered a story of a Jack and the Beanstalk kind of giant? This one scared me as a kid because it's so unbelievable that if he actually did see it, that's crazy.